Hi, I'm George, and today we're here to start a new series on moral and ethical philosophy. This should be, it's going to be divided into two sort of sections, the whole series. The first portion of the series, we're going to visit 7 or so philosophers who will inform us about how to think about ethics. These 7 philosophers are going to ask us, what is right and wrong? What makes something right and wrong? What makes something good or bad? Is there a difference between the question, what is right and wrong, versus the questions, what is good and bad? Right? Some philosophers try to differentiate those questions. We'll see how different philosophers treat that. One way that I like to think about it, at least, is what is it right, or how is it right or wrong to treat other people, versus the question, what is a good life? How do I live a good life? Something like that. Are those similar questions? Certainly they overlap. I don't know that I can give an answer exactly today or at the end of this, whether or not those are the same questions or different questions completely, or how they overlap. But I think as we visit different philosophers, we'll see how they approach those sorts of concerns in different ways. And I think that's going to be quite fascinating. That's what I'm fascinated by, at least, right? One thing, however, that is a challenge for all of us, well, at least it's a challenge for me, is what is all of this about? Why am I wrestling with these kinds of questions? Why am I discussing these kinds of questions? I think that concern is best framed within an article by Robert Coles called The Disparity Between Intellect and Character. And I always like starting these kinds of discussions and these kind of series with this article. Robert Cole is a professor at Harvard University up in Boston, actually in Cambridge, just outside of Boston. And he tells a fascinating anecdote about what really happened with him. We'll get through this in a moment. He starts the article by quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's been called a transcendental philosopher in the American tradition. And Emerson suggests character is higher than intellect. Character is higher than intellect. I've got to say, right off the bat, I agree with him. I would much rather any of us, any person I meet, myself, my children, my friends, I would much rather that they had good character as opposed to high intellect. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, the ideal is to have both, right? But what is more important if you had to choose one, let's say? Emerson suggests character is higher than intellect. Like I just said, I agree. And I think Robert Coles does too. And I hope the rest of us agree too. And so Robert Coles shares with us this anecdote, an exchange that he had with a student that comes up to him during office hours, presumably. And it really illustrates this point that the intellect can be high in bad people. And I think we might even have such people and such experiences in our own personal lives, where we know somebody who's terribly high intellectually speaking, has high intellectual skills, but their character leaves us wanting, Or, in the worst case scenario, the character is actually bad. So the anecdote goes like this. A female student at Harvard, comes to him and discusses her own personal philosophical quandary, really. And the philosophical quandary is this. She, being not from an affluent background at Harvard, she has to clean rooms of other students. She's, some people would call a maid. She's a maid for other students, and she does this to earn a couple of bucks, a couple extra bucks to help make ends meet. However, in this job, she encounters students who are rude to her, who are mean to her, who demean her. How does she make sense of this? One student, she even says, not so subtly propositions her for sex. And she felt terribly offended by this. Here's the problem, right? Now, certainly we all know that there are bad, rude, mean, and offensive people out there. Here's the interesting problem, though, that Emerson's quote helps us highlight. At Harvard University, she's surrounded by these students who are of high intellect. They are very intelligent people. Even more so, she suggests these students did well and scored A's in their moral philosophy classes. What does it mean to score so highly and get straight A's in all your moral philosophy classes, yet you remain a rude, a mean, and offensive person? That's the problem. That's the problem. And so the young student challenges Robert Cole and says, what's the point of all this? What's the point of a moral philosophy class if we're not actually teaching people how to act properly? And then, of course, Cole reminds us that Nazi Germany, right, were some of the most intellectual people in human history. Nazi Germans helped develop high ideas in psychology and philosophy. He names Martin Heidegger. He names Carl Jung. He names Ezra Pound, right? He names Paul de Man. And he reminds us that these significant intellectual thinkers contributed to Nazi and fascist ideology. So again, that question, what does it mean to be of such high intellect? What does it mean to learn moral philosophy if you're going to be a bad person? The quote is in the article, what is the point of knowing good if you don't keep trying to become a good person? Therefore, Cole presents to us the two ironies of moral philosophy and moral philosophy discussions like this. The first irony is that moral philosophy courses don't prompt students to be good. They only prompt students to read about goodness and write about it, presumably, and do well in a course. But they don't really ask students to be good. The second irony that Cole presents is that reading about goodness doesn't really transform a student's or a reader's daily activity and daily actions. How are we to address that point? How are we to address that point? What can educators do? What could teachers and professors and instructors of moral philosophy do in light of those two ironies? Well, Cole kind of presents some ideas. I'll spoil it for you. The student, when he shares his ideas with the student, she's not terribly convinced, for better or for worse. But he does present these ideas nonetheless. The first idea is that professors, teachers, instructors, educators can encourage students to do good. So, yeah, I guess I'm here trying to encourage everybody to do good in the world, right? Encourage you. Be a good person. Don't be rude. Don't be mean. Don't be offensive to others. Another thing that teachers might do is to mandate or assign community service. I've never done that in a course. That said, I did go to a high school that mandated community service. I ended up coaching little kids soccer, in the neighborhood, in the local community, and that was my community service. What did that teach me? I'm not sure. Engaging with the community, certainly. The other suggestion that Coles gives is to suggest that we have class discussions or conversations like this, right? Like we're doing right now, about living a good life, about doing right, about not doing wrong. Do these discussions help? Well, perhaps. Perhaps they do. They certainly expose people, right? The other thing that Coles suggests, and that I frequently do, assign papers in a course, in a moral philosophy course. Why? Because the papers help students reflect upon what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and my own place in the world in doing those things. Now, do students always write that paper? Maybe, maybe not, Sometimes students just know what they have to do to get an A. And Coles acknowledges that. Coles admits, that is what happens sometimes. So the deep question is, do all of these intellectual activities actually help? Do these academic activities actually help people become better persons? Again, recalling Coles' example of the Nazis in Germany. They were certainly some of the best and most well-read people in human history. They knew their stuff. They knew their Kant. They knew their moral philosophy. They knew their philosophers. Yet, they committed some of the worst atrocities in human history as well. So I guess I'm puzzled. This is the puzzle of my life. How do we engage people to be better human beings? To do right, to not do wrong, to live good lives, not to live bad lives. And of course, Coles remarks that the student left his office disappointed. He says she had made her judgment about me. She had passed her judgment on me. But I wonder for a second. I'm recalling reading Joseph Campbell, who wasn't writing or teaching moral philosophy classes, but rather reading and teaching mythology, of all things, world mythologies. And he shares an anecdote with a student where he says something like, the student says, "How am I supposed to read all of these books this week? You assigned too much, Professor Campbell." And Campbell retorts with this: you have the rest of your life to read all these works. You have the rest of your life to wrestle with these questions. We have the rest of our lives to try to improve ourselves, to be good people, in the case of moral philosophy. And so just like Robert Coles shares with us his personal anecdote, please allow me to share my personal anecdote. I wasn't always a great person. I do have a history of being rude and offensive and mean and demeaning. I've done that before. I think I'm a better person today, though. And why am I a better person? Because I have continued this path, because I have continued wrestling with these works and engaging with these works and reading these works and trying to figure out that question: how do you live a good life? My own personal anecdote revolves around the engagement with feminist literature, in fact. And later on in the series, we're going to read and discuss a couple of articles by Annette Baer and Nell Noddings. And they give an interesting spin on feminist ideas. And when we engage with those works, you'll see that I say, wow, I am exactly whom they are speaking to. because they criticize certain philosophers, certain male-oriented philosophers, like me, by the way, who put so much focus on reason and right and wrong and justice. And certainly all those things matter to me. But they opened up to me the idea that empathy and emotions and caring are just as significant an element of moral and ethical philosophy. And of course, upon reading these works, I didn't get it overnight. But like Joseph Campbell suggested, I read it and read it again and engaged with the work again. And I allowed the ideas to percolate in my mind and live in my soul and consider in different aspects of experience. And eventually, some of those ideas really became a significant part of my understanding in terms of living a good life. And I am lucky that the world, that those around me have been patient with me, because I wasn't always a great person. I still struggle with some of those things today. Rudeness and meanness. But I think I'm better at it today. And why am I better at it? Because I continue to read these works and engage with these works and discuss these works. And I let the ideas sit and stew. And I do consider them, even if I don't get it the first time. And so to respond to Robert Coles' student, yeah, sometimes we don't quite get it the first time. But I hope we have the patience to allow these ideas to ruminate in others as well. And to be sure, none of that is a defense for acting badly or rudely. But when I reflect upon my own experience, I do think that reading these the first time and continuing to read them and continuing to engage with these works, yes, I can get an A in a moral philosophy class. But is that really the goal here? Or is the goal to try to live a good life? Because my hunch is, after we go through this, after you read some philosophers, after we discuss some philosophers, my hunch is it's not going to change your life overnight. It's just a hunch. Forgive me. However, we've got the rest of our lives to really ask these questions, and that's what I like about moral philosophy, is that it poses these questions to us. And it does challenge us. And in fact, I do think I'm a better person today because I've continued to read these works and wrestle with these works and engage with these works. And I didn't always get it the first time around. It's okay to fail sometimes. It's okay to learn bad lessons sometimes. It's okay to misunderstand the lessons sometimes. Because echoing Joseph Campbell, we've got the rest of our lives to become better. And isn't that what we're trying to do here? And after one semester of moral philosophy, are you going to change everything? Maybe you change one little thing. I would be grateful if you just made one little change. But maybe even one little change is a little bit too much to ask for. Maybe after 1 year of reading moral philosophy, maybe you change just one little thing. Maybe after 4 years of an undergraduate degree, you change one little thing. I think that might be okay. I think that might be okay. What I really want to do, however, is engage with these different works, because they will spark the change. These works will spark the change, even if you don't change immediately. It'll give us a little seed that hopefully will germinate over the course of our whole lives. Because isn't that the goal of all of this? At least that's my goal. It's the goal that Robert Coles leaves us with on the last line of his article. Isn't the goal of all this to actually affect the way we live? Well, it is for me. I want to actually live a good life. And I hope some of this discussion that will carry through the rest of this series will help you do the same. Bye-bye.